Hello and welcome to this, the 10th episode of the Forrin Podcast. We made it, Mike.
10. I really cannot believe it.
I can't believe it. I can't believe we're still here. This is the podcast where we talk about all things foreign.
Yeah.
About foreigners and countries and stuff like that. And we are 20 weeks old.
Yeah, and 11 episodes in. I mean, this is like official episode 10, but there is an extra.
So there is an extra, that is true.
There's an extra, and there's another extra on the way, in fact, you know.
And tell us about that, Mike.
I interviewed a colleague of mine. I'll see if I can get her name. I was actually quite pleased with myself as a little teaser. I'm pretty much the only person, this is what she said, who actually asked her how to pronounce her name. She's from Bosnia.
Okay.
And her name is Nerma. But see, I can't say it because you have to roll the R. Can you do that? Yeah. Can you roll R's? Nerma. And she's got a great story. She came when she was 8 years old from Bosnia during the war. So we hear about that, and we also hear about how she views her, her own sort of identity, and does she see herself as Bosnian, Danish, and also, which I find really interesting as well, is how perhaps her children feel differently about their identity than she does.
Okay.
And I think that's really quite interesting as well. So that'll be coming out Monday, I believe, the 12th of February. So
Splendid.
And in Denmark, that's like half term. Okay. So our listener has got nothing to do in their half term.
Well,
so
then they've got no. Then our listener has no excuse.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And we've got a bunch of emails to get through this week, and we're actually filming this episode.
Yeah. Hello.
So,
yeah.
So Mike went mental on the socials last week. So you may have seen that if you sign up for our Instagram, you'll see videos of us.
And our YouTube channel.
YouTube channel. What's our Instagram again, Mike?
Our Instagram is @Forrin Podcast, believe it or not. That's
splendid. And what's our YouTube? I can't remember.
Forrin Podcast.
Is it Forrin Podcast?
I believe it is Forrin Podcast,
guessing,
yeah. I reckon if you type it in, you'll get
come
there.
Up. Yeah. Okay. Well, we've got a bunch of emails to get through this week. Our requests for people to send us emails have actually backfired because they've all sent us emails.
Yeah.
And what's the first one we're going to tackle, Mike?
Okay. Well, this one is from my brother, and the reason I want to read this out is because I'll make that clear. It says, hi, Mike and Pat. In order that I've known them all their lives. It's nice to be the first foreigner. I've named your faithful listeners, he says here, to email in that isn't part of Pat's family. But he's actually incorrect because he isn't.
That's what we're about to hear.
Yeah, he's about to hear. There's someone who got in before him, about half an hour, quite amazingly. But anyway, he says, RE, the last episode, I think you're kind of... the whole kind of talk about political ideology, Pat, last time has got our listener thinking. So it says,
got some traction.
It got some traction, yeah. So RE, the last episode, if Le Pen did get into power, how would you reconcile yourself living in what would become essentially a fascist state? Wouldn't you want to leave it? Also, you would be seen as un-French in her and her followers' eyes. Therefore, your passport, he claims, would be worthless. I would say, at best, it would delay your deportation. I don't know. The last bit of that seems to be a lot of conjecture, but the first bit, I think, how would you reconcile? I think that's important.
I'm going to respond to that. Thanks for your email, Sam. Thank you very much.
Don't encourage him, Pat. Don't encourage him.
I don't think my passport would be worthless, I think, is the bottom line. I think if Le Pen did get in, I think our passports would actually protect us from what would almost certainly happen. I think probably what would happen would be something along the lines of what happened in America under Trump, in that there would be a hardening towards foreigners in general. Life would become more difficult, and I'm sure some people would be forced to leave, but more likely people who had extreme political views, effectively Islamists, I don't think we would be forced to leave if we were. Well, probably as I sort of I came to think about as I talked to Mike about this like last time, we would probably not be able to be forced to leave on British passports, but I think our passports would actually be worth something in that case. Would I want to leave? To be honest, no. And like, I think I learned a lot by leaving the UK, and what I learned was that if politics goes sour, I think if you really believe that you should stay and fight, then you should stay and fight. And I genuinely don't think that, I don't regret leaving Britain at all, as is blatantly obvious from everything we've talked about on this podcast. But I also learned that I also caused myself a huge amount of shit by leaving Britain, quite frankly. And I think that Marine Le Pen is worth fighting against, to be honest. So no, I wouldn't actually want to leave. But you would be right. Yeah, France would effectively become a fascist state. I hope that answers your question. I know it's a bit roundabout, and maybe it's not entirely logical, because you are right. And I think logically I would want to leave. I don't want to live under fascism, but also I don't want to allow fascism to ruin other people's lives either. So I would stay and I would fight. There you go.
Yeah, and we have another email.
Let's go.
And this is from my student, Oliver, who's started to listen to the podcast. And he writes here. He doesn't say hello.
I'll say hello to you. Thank you for your email, Oliver. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, hi, Oliver. Anyway, it says here, after listening to your last podcast regarding passport problems, a question came to mind. As a young Dane, I've grown up believing capitalism is crucial for our modern world. However, Pat's anarchist stance met with approval from my social science teacher, which isn't me. I'm his English teacher, so I don't know if he means me, but his social science teacher, she's my colleague called Stina. But anyway, Pat's anarchist stance met with approval from my social science teacher intrigues me. I'd like to hear the compelling arguments behind your position.
Okay.
This might not fit in completely with the theme of your podcast, so I completely understand if you don't want to talk about it. Mm-hmm. And then he writes, I don't know if you notice, it says MVH Oliver, and that stands for Melvenly Hilsen, which translates to with friendly greetings.
Okay.
Oliver.
I think he wrote another email after that as well, didn't he?
Yeah, he said, I'd like to swiftly adjust my question a little. Pat's anarchist as well as anti-capitalist stance.
Okay, I'm going to, first of all, Oliver, thank you very much for your emails. I'm going to put the two of them together, and I think what you're basically asking me is why I'm an anarchist via the lens of capitalism, effectively. It's a big question, and I can only answer it succinctly here. We don't have a huge amount of time, but just to break it down for you, if you're interested, anarchism is, at its most fundamental level, the refusal of coercive hierarchy. So capitalism is probably one of the best examples of coercive hierarchy that exists in the modern world. And probably the other best example is specifically the state, the nation state. And these two concepts basically articulate and work extremely efficiently as a system to control and manipulate populations. So by coercive hierarchy, and there are multiple interpretations of what this means, in anarchist circles. But again, basically what it means is it's a system that forces you to behave in a certain way. You have no choice. You are coerced. So capitalism is an ideology held in place by a network of apparatus such as works, banks, mortgages, shops, and so forth. You can't do much in life without paying. In reality, this concept is now so entrenched, for example, that schemes such as free public transport, which we now have in Montpellier, are seen on a European level as radical and experimental. We are talking about like getting a bus. So I really try to think about that. I think it's important. What this basically means is that, it's seen as radical that you should be able to move around without paying. But even if you have already paid in terms of tax. So just to illustrate, that you basically can't do anything without money. And if you want to test the validity of that statement, obviously try living without it. And I think you'll probably see very quickly that it really isn't possible to live any kind of like comfortable life in Western civilization unless you do as you're told, that you generate and spend money.
You can start by perhaps reading Down and Out in Paris and London.
You could start there. That is a cracking book. That is an absolute...
So you don't have to do it yourself. But,
yeah, you could do that, and I would absolutely recommend it. That is
just so you know, that is a book. That's George Orwell, the guy who wrote 1984 and Animal Farm, and he basically lived as a homeless person on the streets in Paris and London and wrote about it.
The Paris bit is fantastic. Oh, the bit in Britain is amazing as well. But oh my God, it's absolutely amazing. So yes, Oliver, read that book. So people that endorse capitalism as an extension, or who tell you, as they have done, that capitalism is essential to the functioning of contemporary society are, in my opinion, literally endorsing a form of slavery. You have to work, basically. And if you accept this argument, I think it's logical to consider that the entire concept that we can't live without money is fundamentally and morally repugnant. Yes, it's very easy for us living in our privileged, rich societies to think in a way that capitalism works. But I would say to anyone that endorses capitalism in the West that they are sitting on the top of a very tall and very bloody heap. A world driven by capitalism, in my opinion, Oliver, is fundamentally unjust. And anarchism, or libertarian communism, to give it its more modern name, is centered directly on the concept of social justice. I'm just going to give you a couple of references because...
libertarian communism, that's nuts. So that is just nuts.
That's a different conversation.
That's like all the way to the left and all the way to the right, and then meeting.
No. You're getting confused there.
Sorry,
Oliver, I'm going to give you a couple of references because anyone that's interested, I do like to pass the word on. There's a book called "What is an Apparatus?" It's called in English. It's an essay written by a guy called Giorgio Agamben. He was an Italian philosopher, still is an Italian philosopher. He's really old now. He's about 80 something, I think. But it's an essay about defining social apparatus and how they use to modify behavior and to control people. And he talks about capitalism in there. It's a really, really interesting, very lucid piece of writing. It's definitely worth reading. Also, there's a guy called Daniel Guérin. He was a French anarchist, a gay French anarchist. He's dead now. I can't remember, I think he was like early 20th century, who compiled an amazing book called No Gods, No Masters, an Anthology of Anarchism. And that charts the birth of anarchism, which appears, of course, and hilariously in response to the exploitation engendered by industrialization in the 19th century. Anarchism was a response to money. It's important to remember that. It's an absolutely amazing book. I really recommend it. And finally, there's another guy called Murray Bookchin, who was an American anarchist. He's dead now, unfortunately, who invented a concept called social ecology. And his thinking was actually the basis of what is called today eco-anarchism or green anarchism. And it's absolutely fascinating. He wrote in English, obviously, and really, really fundamental if you want to try to think about how we can live in a different fashion than the ecologically disastrous forms of capitalistic nationalism that we see around us today. So, to answer your question, Oliver, why am I an anarchist and why am I an anti-capitalist? It's because I'm fundamentally opposed to coercive authority, and I believe we should only do things if we really want to. I don't believe that you or anybody else should have the right to tell me what to do. It's that simple. So, many thanks for your email, and I hope that goes some way to starting to answer your question. I really hope you continue to read on it.
And let's never, ever mention anarchism again.
Let's go! Go anarchism!
Yay!
Yeah!
I was actually thinking in the wake of our last podcast and about the kind of, about what this podcast is, Pat. I was having a kind of an existential, what is this podcast? Yeah, and at the top of the show, I love saying that. At the top of the show, you said it's about national identity, which it is, but
in a way.
But I also think it is, and I'm going to actually quote you from the Queen is Dead episode. It really is kind of anti-vertical hierarchy.
That is it.
That is pretty much, and yet and obviously maybe being foreign and the things we talk about puts us in a kind of position where perhaps that vertical hierarchy is a lot clearer to us. Yep. Because of certain things. Again, I'm not going to compare myself to even Nerma, who I just interviewed, and anyone from who's like Muslim or from an Arab country. But still, those vertical power structures become a lot clearer. And I think a lot of our topics have, in a way, all been about that. Rather than actually perhaps being foreign or national identity.
I think that's a completely legitimate thing to say, Mike. And so I'm about to move on to a thesis. I'm doing my master's at the moment, and my thesis will be research into, in a way, national identity. It was one of the reasons that we started this podcast, is because it's something that we share in common, is that we're not from the countries in which we live, and even though there are very particular aspects to certain foreigners' situations, such as, for example, Muslim people or the Jews in the Holocaust or people who fled from Bosnia. There is a universal aspect to being foreign. I think it's I think you're absolutely right and justified to say what you have just said. I agree with you. Email number 3. This is so this is from is this email number 3 or this is 3?
Yeah, this is email number 3.
This is from some lady called Sue. Yeah, apparently Sue. You know her.
Yeah, I do, and she's Sam's mother.
Hi,
and
Sue.
And mine. Yeah, hi, Mum. Says here, the subject is the headline of an article which she has sent to us, and it says here, France brings in stricter French language requirements for foreigners, and basically the only email is couldn't remember your podcast. She sent it to me and I forwarded it, but it doesn't matter. But yeah, there is an article here saying France brings in stricter foreign language requirements for foreigners, and I didn't know how recent that was, because I do remember you mentioning something along those lines on a previous episode. Yeah. But yeah.
Yeah, I can talk. I'll talk about it quickly. Thanks, Sue, for your email. Hi, Sue.
Thanks, Mum. Yeah.
So the article that you've linked to is talking about, it's called the Loi Immigration, the immigration law, which is being talked about a lot in the French press at the moment. There was a version of it managed to sort of get through Parliament in France. It's all about sort of like hardening the law against immigrants, mainly from North Africa, effectively, but obviously it affects everybody that doesn't have a French passport. It got booted out as being unconstitutional, and 32 articles in it were actually rejected by the Constitutional Court in France on the 25th of January. And actually today, the centrist element in the French Parliament has put through another text, so that's got to go back. So it's still being sort of like not backwards and forwards, but the articles that were put back in do actually include. There's going to be a new requirement that I think people that are coming into France for reasons of family grouping are going to be required to have I can't remember what word was actually used. It's like a fundamental level of French, which basically wasn't there before. And there's other stuff in there about. It's basically going to be the time period for people that don't work to get certain benefits, including family benefits, is going to be extended to 5 years. So if women come over with children and can't work, they won't be able to get any money for 5 years. So yay France, woo! So that was sort of deemed to be unconstitutional for some reason. Yeah. Like that starving children thing. But that's been stuck back in and is going through. They're trying to get it through at the moment to stop people claiming family benefit if they don't work. So many thanks for your email, Sue. And
that's actually quite old news. Sorry.
But it is ongoing.
No, sorry, I didn't mean old news in terms of French. I just meant this whole what the Danes calls familiesammenføring, which is bringing the family. So if someone's got asylum here in Denmark, then they can have their whole family come with them. That's just something that the Danes kind of dealt with
Years ago.
Yeah, basically years ago. Yeah, because there was a lot of that going on, and so there was a lot of people bringing their wives and children up.
Those fucking crazy bastards.
And there was and they were, if I'm not going to talk I'm not going to sort of, I'm just going to say how it is. And a lot of them, they just didn't integrate. So they just came here and kind of got social benefit, and that's it. So all of a sudden you had one person who got asylum, and then which you maybe had budgeted as a national economy for having, and all of a sudden you might have 4 or 5 more that were coming, and then all of a sudden that cost like 5 tripled or quintupled or whatever.
They're just a drag on the economy, Mike.
That's it, yeah. And that was the argument for stopping this and
for starving the children.
And also they kind of mixed it up with also sort of with rights of the female as well, that maybe the marriage in their country was kind of forced. And so bringing them, so that you had to be over a certain age before you could actually do this familiar something, bring them together. But yeah, it's politics from
the age
from
thing is part of the new bill is the age thing.
Yeah.
I think that you're not allowed to come if you're under 21. You're not allowed.
That's
to.
Right. Yeah. That's
it's probably just a similar thing from the sound of it to what already exists in Denmark. Yeah.
Which is a great segue to the next section about because France just wants to be Denmark.
Tell me about that, Mike.
Well, I mean, we agreed last week that we would talk about working, and I just think that the Danish, and I think maybe we were going to talk about what it's actually like to go to work as sort of individuals, but I think the Danish sort of working sort of political model of is actually quite interesting. And I was talking to a colleague about it, and he teaches about it, and he actually had a news article about how France wants to copy this Danish work model, and it's just quite interesting, I think, because the Danish.
So what is the model?
It's called flex security, and it's actually quite for what is essentially a socialist country. It's actually quite sort of liberal because it gives private companies or the employers, lots and lots of flexibility to hire and fire. And what that means is how that works is then that if I get fired, I could essentially get fired with 30 days notice, and that's it.
Right.
But instead of perhaps what you would imagine in Britain or in America, I kind of just get cast down onto the streets. We have the unions, and we have something called day money, dagpenge. So I get kind of 80% of my wages funded. So I pay to the union every month. So that means if I lose my job, I don't have to sort of, my life doesn't sort of just collapse around me. And also the state, there's also a third, because everything in social sciences, as you know, is a triangle. So you've got at the top, you've got the employer, and then you've got the social security, and then you've also got education, that you can sort of re-educate yourself quite easily. So maybe if there structurally aren't actually any jobs in your area of expertise, you can maybe then take a few courses and move slightly educational wise so you can be re-employed again. And this whole thing kind of goes around. But it really is to the advantage of employers to hire and fire. So again, you don't have these kind of, you don't have basically this sort of structural unemployment.
Right.
Where you've got loads of people basically who are hired to do with a certain skill, but you then can't fire them, even though, again, as our old friend capitalism with supply and demand, if the demand isn't there, then you just can't fire your right, but you can in Denmark but they can. So and that's something that Macron wanted to copy, and he actually in his election pledge in 2017 said he was going to do it, and he came to Denmark in 2018. And but it's quite different to the French model from this news article, and they had a French reporter talking about it, that in France you actually have really long kind of contracts, and
they're called CDEs, which means the E is the I, and it stands for indefinite. Basically, it means permanent. If you get if you get a CDE, you effectively you have a huge amount of rights. You can't just be sacked. Like
that's right.
Yeah.
And a lot of the unions, because in Denmark as well, the unions have kind of fought for the right to represent the workers, where the French state, apparently, that they've appointed unions. The state in France is actually, which again surprised me because that's a kind of a more socialist angle. The state in France controls so much to do with hiring and firing and unions and everything else, where the Danish model is that you'll have the union representing the workers talking to the employer and the government stays out of it. It doesn't always work out like that, but that is the idea of it. So even though the government, obviously, if you're working in the public sector, there's only a certain amount, there's a certain budget that the government has maybe afforded, but you're not actually dealing with the government, you're dealing with a representative for that area of the public sector. Then you've got the unions, and then they work it out, and the government is away from that, and yeah, so I just find that to be quite. But again, now we're in 2023, so I don't know how many more
Basically,
of those reforms have come in.
There's been a huge amount of trouble about like work and pension reform in France in like the last sort of 5 or 6 years. I mean, I'm sure you must have seen, you must have seen a bunch of it on the news. And
Yeah.
there's been like literally like civil unrest basically over. Especially over pensions. They did manage to get it through in the end because I think, people just got sort of bored of fighting in the end and they just sort of like pushed it through. It was just sort of like balancing the books type thing. In terms of the unions, France is a really particular case. Like because of the revolution and effectively everything that happened after the revolution. Obviously, the revolution was in like 1789. Yeah, it was 1789. And because modern France is effectively based on that moment, the unions are monumentally powerful in France. Like the government can't do anything, pretty much. Well, I mean, they kind of can, but like they certainly have to consult the unions at pretty much every step. Sure, I don't know if you've been watching on the news this week. I don't know if it's made it out of France, but the farmers are up in arms. They've blockaded Paris, etc., and like obviously Montignon, which is where the French prime minister sits, sort of the French version of Downing Street in Britain. They have to they have to give an audience to the unions. The unions are extremely powerful in France in terms of like workers' rights and stuff. I need to just explain something about the sort of like the idea of the French state and people who work for the state in France. If you work for the state in France,
can you?
If you literally can't be fired, it's unconstitutional. The only way you can be fired is for gross misconduct. So I mean that literally means if you're violent at work, if you fight someone. So like or you steal or whatever. I know people who've been off work for like literally maybe 2 or 3 years on full pay, and you can't get sacked, and you get a pension at the end of it, and it's you're called a fonctionnaire, and it's this is one of the reasons I'm doing
fonctionnaire.
A doctorate. Yeah, exactly.
In Danish, it's called fonctionnaire.
Okay.
But it doesn't entail that you can't be fired. But yeah.
But the sort of machinery of the state in France is centralized and massive. So like for example, obviously like Mike and I are both from Britain, and we're very used to, we kind of grew up with what happened in the 80s and where basically all of the sort of state infrastructure was effectively sold off. So things like British Gas, British Rail, et cetera, that were used to be owned by the state. They were sold, literally sold. You can buy shares in British Rail, blah, blah, blah. Well, I think you could. You could definitely buy shares in British Gas. Remember that. And in France...
Thanks, Thatcher.
In France, for example, the SNCF, which is the railways in France, is owned by the state. So if you work for SNCF, you're part of the unions, which is incredibly powerful. They're called the cheminots, which are like the chimneys. So like as in the front of the train on the old steam trains would have a chimney, so they were called the chimney workers basically. And this is why one of the reasons that like people strike so much in France is because you can't get fired. So it's a constitutional right to be able to strike. You can't get sacked for it. And it's in the Constitution because it's effectively there to protect you against exploitation by the state and by bosses. But in terms of like the actual, obviously, again, coming from Britain, where you're used to a very sort of like slimmed down state now, it's kind of it went American kind of thing. Everything got sold off, and there was this idea, the whole idea of sort of like stripping down red tape and getting rid of bureaucracy, blah, blah, blah. France is exactly the opposite. There are a lot of people that don't, that want it to be reformed, but there are also a lot of people that really, really don't. But briefly, the upshot is that, like, in terms of like workers' rights, I mean, my God, you have to go a long way to get sacked in France. Put it that way. Like, once you've got a CDE, once you've got like a long contract, as you said, like you're.
But can't you kind of quite literally sort of take the piss?
Yeah,
like get the CDE and then just say, I'm not coming in.
Yeah, exactly.
That's it. I'm not going to work anymore. That's it. I've done it. I've got it. There must be a way that, to sort of stop
sacked.
That because I'm moving to France, Pat, and I'm going to get a job, and then I'm just going to sit down and do nothing for the rest of my life and get paid.
What has actually happened is that getting a CDE is actually now incredibly difficult. But for exactly that reason. So like you've got,
so there are people that have done it.
So well, yeah, I assume there are, but like it's not easy. You don't just sort of like wake up in the morning and just go, oh right, I'm off to work for the council. Do you know what I mean? It's just like literally to get that kind of job, you have to be like, masters and up effectively. Like you can get jobs as fonctionnaires, like teachers, for example, you would have to have like a degree, and then you'd have to have sort of like a postgraduate like learning masters kind of thing.
I've got that, so I should move.
There you go. Like, if you're a teacher in France, you're a fonctionnaire. But again, like one of like Macron's like reforms, or is something that has been talked about, is stopping teachers being fonctionnaires, because like a teacher, once you're in, that's it.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah, I know.
Sounds absolutely amazing.
Yeah, you should come over, man. Honestly, it's awesome.
Yeah, this is brilliant. Yeah,
it's just free money everywhere, you know what I mean? No, but like what it's actually given rise to, because obviously there's a lot of tension between people who kind of see it as being archaic, obviously, and a lot of companies will only give CDDs, which is déterminé, which means that you have to constantly renew your contract. Yeah. And like once your contract's over, they can just there's no like not getting fired. Then you're just like all the best.
Okay, yeah.
So like it's a very France is a really particular circumstance. It's not really the same as, say, Britain and America, or from the sound of it, from Denmark. And I'm not surprised that Macron went over there. Macron's a big reformist, you see.
Because in Denmark, we've got this thing called the taxameterordning, which a lot of people, and it only really applies to, it applies to the public sector, but it's based upon private sector kind of how it works. So basically every patient, every student, everyone you deal with in the public sector becomes like I don't know, if we just say an iPhone, for example. So if you sell iPhones, a lot of iPhones, you make a lot of money. If you don't sell a lot of iPhones, then you don't make a lot of money, and you might have to close down some factories. So what they've done is, for example, where I work, we're really, really susceptible to sort of economic trends in society.
People getting fired.
Yeah, basically. So when people get fired, it's good for us, because when people get fired, as I said about the model, then they may come to us to get an education or re-educate or build on their education. And then we have loads of customers, you see. They're customers now. But the problem is, you see, now we're in a situation where we've actually got kind of full employment. Then every year, because we are kind of paid per student and we have fewer students, that means the money the school gets is less, which means you have to fire teachers.
Market forces, Mike.
Yeah, that's it. So every year for the last 3 or 4 years, we've had to fire. And we've even been in situations where we've had our prognosis has been that we're going to have this amount of students. So we've employed like 10 new teachers. And then 3 months later, we fired 15. because it hasn't turned out like that, and the people we thought we were going to come aren't going to come. So, but that is kind of a model that the government came with probably about 10, 15 years ago now, and so it affects me and my workplace, but also in hospitals. So the amount of patients you can get in and out again effectively, you'll get money from the state for it.
Okay.
And so the whole idea of and they're talking about it, but it's only really being talked about. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, with the idea that education having this kind of intrinsic monetary value. So it doesn't matter even if we have 100 students or 1,000 students, this school has to exist, and there has to be a certain amount, almost like an emergency ward in a hospital or an emergency unit somewhere. There might not be any emergency patients for a month, but you can't close that down because there might come, and so thinking about maybe this sort of high school where I work as a kind of, does it have its own intrinsic value, and which isn't just based on how many students we get through, because then it also affects our decision making, because you can, just like when I was saying about people in France kind of getting that job and then doing nothing. We also have this just sounds like paradise to me, but it's just we could have this. We have a lot of students, you see, who perhaps aren't really ready to be there, and who don't really turn up very much or don't do very much. And, they are young people, so I'm not going to criticize them. But instead of saying, well, you're not ready to be here, come back in a year, we actually do our best to keep them, because each student to us actually has, because so in a way you can kind of, in the conflict, am I teaching because I actually want to, help people, or am I teaching these people because I want to keep my job?
Yeah. No, I understand. I mean, like in France, it's education. It's basically like what's happening in French education is really similar to what happened to us probably in when we went to a kind of university under Thatcher, and like what happened after Thatcher, and basically like the amount of spending is just going down like constantly. And I know like people who work in education. Especially in the arts, obviously, like, I'm doing an arts master's, and, there's, it's not pretty, it's just like, there's just increasingly less money. But the dropout rate, for example, like in France, like I know we were supposed to be talking about work, but let's talk about schools. It's all gravy. The dropout rate in French university is absolutely insane. You see, like I'll tell you a bit of a story about schools in France. Basically, again, it's written into the constitution. I think it's written into the constitution. Don't want to get that wrong. But it's definitely, it's a thing in France. Basically, if you pass your A levels, or it's called your baccalaureate, you are entitled to go to university. Yeah, you are entitled to a place.
Same in Denmark. Okay. Oh no, okay.
Right.
Now you have to apply, I think.
Yeah, no, you still have to apply, but you're entitled to go. Like, and like basically the state will pay for you, and they'll pay almost all of it. You have to pay a tiny fee, and it's certainly nothing like Britain or whatever, where you have to pay all of your
tuition fees. Yeah,
your tuition fees and stuff. You don't have to do that,
and you get no grant.
That's it. So you can go, but you have to starve and live in a shoebox.
You get the politicians you deserve.
And I think the dropout rate is something like, I think it's over 50% in the first year.
Wow.
So say for, I think the acceptance rate on a literature degree. I did a literature degree at Paul Valéry University in Montpellier. The acceptance rate is 100% for that degree. So like everyone who applies to do literature at Paul Valéry goes to Paul Valéry to do literature. Every single person, or those that actually accept their sort of acceptance, if you see what I mean. And of those people, like I think it's 55% of them leave in year one. Wow. So you basically have these like massive like universities. Like Paul Valéry is huge. Like, I mean, it's like, well, I say it's huge. I've got no real frame of reference. It's the only university I ever went to. I think it's got about 25,000 students. Is that large? I don't know. It
seems to be pretty large.
It's pretty big. You know, there are lots of buildings and people and shit. You know what I mean? And like in the literally like half of like amphitheaters just full of students doing absolutely nothing, doing nothing at all. Like wow. I've sat in lectures like, you know, on like, you know, French linguistics and, you know, sort of like revolutionary history and stuff with like, you know, like students in front of me just watching football matches on their fucking iPads. Do you know what I mean? And it's just like, you know, it's kind of like, it's tough because like, you know, I absolutely defend the right for everybody to have the opportunity to get educated. Yeah. But there are a lot of people, and like, you know, with some like logical justification, it would say maybe those people shouldn't be there. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
It's pretty tough, and I've got no answer to that because I would always just say, well, okay, well, you know, fucking, you know, they should be able to go to school if they want. Do you know what I mean? But like, it's yeah. I don't know. I've got no answer to that, and I don't know where I'm going with that. But like, I've sort of like seen.
I can give you some Danish numbers if you like.
Go on, let's have them. Let's go.
It says here I found something from the University of Aarhus, and it says in Denmark, as in most other countries in the world, there are many students who do not finish their like university education. Among students that started their studies in the period from 2006 to 2010, that's the best I could do, 29% didn't finish, but in a 5-year period. So I don't know about the first year, but it's only 30% in a 5-year period didn't finish.
That's pretty amazing.
That's
like honestly,
good,
like in France, like honestly, the dropout rates are like really high in France. Like I mean, and it's like 50% every year. You know, of the degree. When you go through to masters, it sort of like starts to, you know, it sort of like falls down to around that, I think, like sort of 20-30% don't finish.
You don't really take a masters unless you like,
unless you really want to do it.
Unless you want to do
it.
Yeah.
For the degree, I think a lot of people do get kind of like wasted. I'm not being funny. Did you did your degree in Denmark, didn't you?
Yeah.
Was it hard?
Yeah.
Mine was fucking unbelievably hard. I'm not surprised 50 people get wasted. Do you know what I mean? It's really,
mine wasn't
really
as hard as
difficult.
yours. I mean, you did like, you know, you like wrote stuff in French.
Yeah, but, you know, still like, yeah, but like just because you had to write in English doesn't mean it wasn't hard just because it was in English. You know
it was. Oh, and social science. Yeah, it was hard. Yeah, it was. Yeah, I mean, but it's supposed to be, right? I mean, that's.
Did you know people that kind of like failed? Did you know people that like left and?
I think there's a couple of people kind of dropped out from the class, realised that maybe English studies wasn't for them. They might have moved on to a different area of study, and a couple of them maybe actually dropped out of uni. But I would say most of the people in my class graduate well. Again, because you change, you see, in the masters, my class was the English class for like 2.5-3 years, but then when I took my I've forgotten. Me and Stacey and I spoke about it the other day. When I took my minor, that's it. My major was in English. When I took my minor in social sciences, then all of a sudden there's a whole new group that have come from all different other studies. So, you know, but I would say that most people that I knew or know of finished. Yeah. But again, you know, you get student grants. You can also get a student loan on top of your student grant. You can, you also get kind of housing benefit, you know, a subsidiary towards lodging and housing and stuff because you're a student.
I'm not sure how much help there is here. Seriously, there's been a load of shit about like it's called precarity, like precariousness for students. Like I know when I was doing my degree, there were like one student, I think it was in Nantes, actually set himself on fire outside of one of the university canteens and burnt himself to death. Jesus. Because he had no money. It's like, honestly, it's like we're really in a sort of like transitionary phase in France where like between what I said, there's this like incredibly stiff resistance against reform, against, you know, reforming the law. But then, you know, the government obviously is in charge of all the money. So, like, you know, if they kind of like starve the system of money, which means that like loads of people go to university that effectively can't afford to go. It's not an easy situation, but yeah. So, like, I've enjoyed this talk about work, Mike.
Yeah, it's great, isn't it?
It's been good.
But the Danish system is also under threat. Just to sort of wrap that up, because it is worth mentioning that that in order to save money, you see, this when I said about having day money, let's just say you get fired and you've only got 30 days notice, but again, you get like 80% of your wages for, and you get quite a good amount of money, but that used to be up to 4 years you could have that, you see.
Okay, no.
So you get 4 years of maybe just sort of looking for work. And again, I'm going to approach it sort of both political angles. And so that would, again, perhaps annoy politicians or whatever, because then you're only just going to take the job that you kind of want rather than taking the job that society maybe needs you to have. Or you can just sort of think to yourself, okay, I'm just going to chill for a couple of years before I even start to work. So what they did, they've reduced the amount of time. That 4 years has now been cut down to 2 years, and which has then put more pressure on people who are unemployed. But that in turn, you see, kind of ruins the model, because then you're going to start asking your employer for longer contracts.
Yeah.
And then if you've got longer contracts, then the whole idea of the model of being able to hire and fire and this flex security, this flexible really marketplace doesn't really work anymore. And also you had the idea, when I said about the government not being involved, there has been like a teacher strike where, you do kind of, you have a right to strike in Denmark, but in the end, the government, because the two parties couldn't really reach an agreement about teachers' pay, and because, how can I say it? They wanted to have a reform of primary schools, of the school system. And that entailed how teachers' wages were kind of worked out. So it became, you weren't fonctionnaire anymore. It was almost, you had to sort of clock in, clock out, and there was this big protest. And so what the government did, they did something called a lockout. Okay. Which is then they closed the gates. So instead of the workers saying we're not going to come to work, they said no, you're not going to come to work, and that then means that we're not going to pay you, which then puts loads of pressure on the unions. But because you pay to the unions, they've got a coffers, they can pay you. But in the end, you see, the government does have the power, which it did, just to say, okay, this conflict has gone on long enough. Money. This conflict has gone on long enough. Go back to work, and these are the terms. So what they did, or what they've been accused of doing, if you're cynical, and I think pretty much I am cynical, so I pretty much agree with it, that they wanted these reforms through, so they sat back, let the process kind of work itself out and say, the Danish model, we don't get involved. But in the end, look, your children aren't being taught. Wait until public opinion kind of turns against the teachers, and then just say, okay, now we're going to just push our reform through, and you're just going to have to go to work or you're fired. And that is kind of, that model, again, just sort of collapsing, because the whole idea of it is that the government shouldn't have any role. So screw the Danish model, Pat, screw it.
Screw that model, Mike.
You can have it. You can have it in France. You can have it, mate.
No, I'm all right, boss.
We don't want it anymore. We don't want it anymore.
You can keep it. Come here and enjoy the French model.
Yeah, I think I'm going to come to Montpellier, and unfortunately, because I've visited Pat a couple of times in Montpellier, I've actually programmed in on my phone the weather, and it's probably the worst thing I could have ever done, because every now and then, you know what it's like, he's sitting there and you're just sort of scrolling around on your phone, and I can see that, I think a week ago I was looking at that in Denmark, it was like -4 the next day, and in Montpellier it was about 21 degrees and sunshine.
I think right now it's 13 degrees outside.
Yeah, it's about 4 with gale force winds here.
Yeah, I think tomorrow it's going to be 19 degrees tomorrow. That'll be nice.
I think we're about 7 or 8.
20 degrees on Sunday. I'll look forward to that. I might go to the beach.
And the thing is, I'm sitting, as you can see, in a shirt unbuttoned, and Pat's got a bloody jumper on, so he really is just rubbing it in. so cold.
Well, anyway, that was an interesting chat. I enjoyed that. That was good. Maybe we can go back to work at some point. Talking about work at some point. We drifted off into education there, but whatever. That was fun. let's wrap up episode 10 or 11. 10, 10B or 10A.
No, it's officially episode 10 of the, of Forrin.
Forrin.
Yeah.
Many thanks to all of you that have made it to 51 minutes of this podcast. I think it's about 51.
It is 51. Yeah.
And we'll be back.
Get a life, seriously. In fact, listen to it, and then go on the YouTube channel, and then watch it. Then watch the whole thing.
That's it. Watch it all and comment.
Yeah, comment on it, and then go on the Instagram, and then subscribe to that, and then write us an email at forrinpodcast@gmail.com with a kind of a question, and just and.
We'll give you a shout.
You can also sort of get a tattoo, maybe around about there with Forrin written on it.
Forrin.
That's it. Yeah,
that'd be good. Anyway, many thanks for listening, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks. So
and remember, next Monday is the interview with
I'm sorry,
the Forrin Podcast Extra. So look forward to that. Bye bye.